Mr. Schroeder, apologies for how long this took. This is how to annotate non-written text. Often when we're giving something to our students, we're giving them something that is written, right? Something that we want them to annotate. And I'm going to give you a couple of strategies that you can use to annotate things that are still considered textual, but are not necessarily written. It's not words, it's video, or it's audio, or it's visual, or it's a video. So I'm going to just give you a couple of techniques for that. The first thing I'm going to start with, and if you've had a session with me before, I've gone over this before with you, so I just wanted to do this as a quick review. And it's called Describe, Analyze, Interpret. Does anybody remember that, or anybody understand that, remember that, right? So describe, analyze, interpret, and I had a beautiful PowerPoint, and I couldn't find it on my, my board, so I'm just going to wing it for you. Describe Describe is the first part of your observation that you use for, and you can use it for any type of text that is non-written, and you can't actually use it for written text. Describe is that question that you ask that you're looking just for the facts, right? For something that's audio, which we're going to be listening to, probably won't play the whole thing because we won't have time to listen to it, but I often listen to StoryCorps in my classrooms. Anybody familiar with StoryCorps? Mm-hmm. If you're not, you can find that. I find them on NPR because it gives a little context, but there's also an entire website devoted to StoryCorps, which just tells, it's like stories of people who've interviewed each other. And we listen to it just to kind of make connections, or I'll generally use it as a pre-reading strategy for maybe a play that we're reading or something like that, to just sort of make connections to other stories where this might be based in real life. So we'll start with describe. The great thing about this technique and the techniques I'm going to show you is if you're going to play something like this, or if you're going to play even a longer video, and you don't necessarily, you know the video's good, but you don't necessarily have the time to sit there and make the questions for the guided reading and all of that, you can use this to just kind of get you through that sort of annotation that you need. So these are facts. You're looking for good sentence starters for this would be I see, I hear, I notice. And even though this is going to be audio, you can still use these as sentence starters. So I see is maybe something you might see in your mind's eye, but you want to stick with facts, right? You don't want to make assumptions on that. The second thing you do is analyze, and this is just questions, right? You're like, right, what do you mean? I don't see this right. So these are questions you had, and it's more about curiosities. I'm curious about, or I wonder. And then finally you have interpret. And this is more open-ended. This is very close-ended. It's sort of like, I see, or I hear her say this specifically. Analyzes, I wonder about what happened to so-and-so after this. And then the interpret is your drawing conclusions. Not inclusions, conclusions. You're drawing conclusions in this sense. I also teach, or I'm certified English, so I always think of it in this sense. I think this because I heard, and that comes back to your noticings, right? So this is making your conclusions based on what you notice. That's a very science-based, I think. I don't know. So we're just going to listen to this. What I would generally have students do is, as they're listening, I would have them either, they could make a T-chart of describes on one side and analyze on one side, and then what they see, or I'll give them a chart, whatever. You can do this as a Google form. Yeah, not yet. So yeah. So just listen and think about what you hear.
It's what makes a Subaru a Subaru.
A little free advertising for Subaru here. So I hear nothing.
20 years ago, Leona disappeared. She was never seen again. She is one of many Native American women who have gone missing. Her daughter came to StoryCorps to remember when she got the phone call that her mother had disappeared. My mom was independent, and she was super self-sufficient, so I was really afraid to call the police. I could just hear her, like, you need to mind your own business. I'm an adult. I can take care of myself. Her car being found was the real alarm to me. When I got to her house, there was still coffee in the coffee pot. She had groceries, she had bread. I went in her room and I laid down on her bed for a second, and I could smell her in the pillows, and I just cried. I looked over in her.
It's okay to stop there because there's already some text that you're hearing, right? That's not necessarily something that's written. However, one of the great things about StoryCorps is that you can get a transcript, and if you have students who you'd like to have them listening, you can do that. They're all transcripted, all of them. So that's what's really great about them. But I would challenge you, or challenge our students, to really be listening, because it's going to cue them into what they need to be listening to. So, and then they can also get perspective from what other students are hearing. And just to try this out, what was something that you heard, something you saw, something you noticed in, just in that little snippet that you heard? Yeah?
There's a distrust in police.
There's a distrust in police. Why do you say that?
Well, I noticed that when she was thinking about what her mother would do if there was like a missing, like, no, don't call them, I'm fine.
So, did you hear her say, she distrusted the police?
No.
Right, so we want to get to, that would be an interpret, right? You heard the initial part, which was what?
The describe. So you're just talking about the describe.
Yeah, exactly. You jumped to the interpret. But what was it that you heard? Say that again. The part that you actually heard.
So the part that I heard is that kind of her imagining what her mother would say in
Right.
the situation.
Exactly. Yeah.
When she went to her mother's home, there was still coffee in the coffee pot.
Right, exactly. I saw that. I heard that, right? That's all detail. Any others? Just one more? Yeah.
She laid down on her mother's bed and
Yeah,
cried.
she laid down on her mother's bed, right? These are all describes. These are all like just details of, specific details of what they heard, right? Analyze. What are some questions we might have? And this we can open up to, like, I don't know, what? Yeah.
Where is she?
Where is she, right? Yeah.
How long after the kidnapping was she in her mom's house?
Well,
Exactly.
That's an interpret, even though she was kidnapped.
Well, that's a question I have.
Was she kidnapped? Was she kidnapped, and how long after was she? Yeah, no, seriously though, that might be a question. That's a good follow-up. Yeah.
I was curious about how she started with how this was a common thing, that there was this happened to many women who are Native American.
Yeah, great, good questions. And then we already had one interpret. Yes.
I was going to say, does she disappear often?
Does she disappear often? Right. These are all great questions. Right. This is good for analyze. Right. And already we've generated all kinds of interesting ideas. Those students who are not participating, right, if I had a T-chart or if I had a handout for them, I would encourage them to be writing down. If you don't have one of these questions, you can write down one of these other questions and maybe create your own answers. Then for the interpret, we had one interpret already, right? I think this because this is what I heard. And you looped it back to what you heard, right? I made this generalization because this is what I said. Whether it's right or wrong, we can talk about that later or have a bigger discussion about that, but it's using what you found in here, right? So that's my first technique, that's describe, analyze, interpret. And that you can do for audio, you can do it for video, you can do it for a visual, or anything like that. Cool? How much time do I have? Like 3 minutes, right?
5, 6.
5, 6. Where did I put my other? 2? All right, we'll do this then.
I see what you're doing.
Okay. Sorry, I apologize.
So this is another technique I use for that I call notice. I don't call it. I've got it from a colleague. I don't know what I call it. It's called notice and focus. And with notice and focus, this is an old PowerPoint. This isn't the one I prepared for you today. But this is looking at an image and going into detail about the image, just using observations, right? So this is what I would have you do then is we'll look at this picture, not this one, but the next one. Look at this picture, and I want you to think of 5 general observations. You can make that number whatever you want. It could be no fewer than whatever, but this picture is pretty detailed, so at this particular point I'm just going to go for 5, right? About what the picture is about. Think of these questions. What's this picture's story? Who is this picture about? What emotions do you feel when looking at this picture? Where does this picture take place? Why did the painter, it's a little hint of what the picture is going to be, why did the painter paint this picture, but it could be a photograph. And when does this picture take place? So we have where, when, it's kind of basically journalistic stuff, right? It's a pretty common picture, we know this picture. But look, you can get up out of your seat if you want to look up closer, or I would encourage my students to go up to the piece and look closer. And looking at this one, this is a little bit more open-ended, a little more free-form, but you could do describe, analyze, interpret with just this image. You say, what do you see? I see color. What colors do you see? Red, right? You could go back to that. Go back, but thinking about the questions that I asked, those 5 W's, right? Who is this picture about? Be thinking about that. And I might, on this one, have you draw a T-chart again, or provide you with a T-chart, where on one side you're putting your observations and what you're seeing. Or, I'm sorry, answering those questions. Who is this story about? Why did the painter paint this picture? Where is this picture? Does anybody have answers to any of these questions, or thoughts about how to answer these questions? Yeah, I'm sorry.
I think it's from the Harlem Renaissance, I believe.
I think it's from the Harlem Renaissance. Great. What does that mean?
So it was in the 1920s. It was a period of, in the African American community in Harlem, New York, there was an outpouring of expression, creative poetry, art, music.
Cool. Let's focus on the picture now. It's from the Harlem Renaissance. It's probably written around the Harlem Renaissance time. What do we notice? What stories are being told here?
People are having fun dancing.
People are having fun dancing. There is some dancing going on. That might lead us to where this might be. Where might this be?
Club.
A club, right? A club during the Harlem, probably a club in Harlem, since we're thinking about it might be in the Harlem Renaissance, right?
I think it's actually in Chicago. Archibald Motley is the painter, and he lived in the Bronzeville area.
So a little extra context when we're thinking about the painting. Why do we think, if the painter was from Chicago, why do we think the painter might have painted this picture? What kind of emotions does this picture give us? We have dancing, we're clubbing.
Community.
Community, sure.
Excitement.
Excitement.
Passion.
Passion. So these are things, right? Where do we get those ideas? We're talking, we have those emotions. Where do we get those ideas in this picture? Yeah.
The colors of the painting and the faces of the people that are being portrayed.
Tell me more about that.
About both.
About the color, yeah. How does the color show us passion?
They're brighter colors. They're not very muted. They're not like vibrant. They're not like pastels, and they're not neons, but they're colorful. There's greens, there's reds, there's blues, there's pinks.
Orange, yeah. Why do those colors say passion to you and excitement, as opposed to muted colors?
I don't know. They just do.
Right, so that's the kind of discussion that can happen when you're just looking at an image, right? And looking at the image as a piece of text, right? We come to things with certain feelings and things that we see, but then we also want to get our students and get people into looking at why we're seeing those things. So getting to color, getting to the actual content of what's happening, and looking at this as a piece of text that just doesn't happen to be written, right? There's all kinds of evidence here that can support the idea of emotion. Just like there's all kinds of evidence that was in the audio that we heard. And so those are things that you can be looking for. Those are two techniques that I have for non-written text. I have another one that I didn't have an opportunity to show you today, but we can post them on ILT. Yeah, great. Thank you, everybody.